The wind on 7B never stopped. It howled across the rocky plains like a wounded animal, carrying dust and ice particles that stung any exposed skin. Daniel Cole had lived on this frontier world for 3 years now, and he still was not used to that wind. He did not think he ever would be. He pulled his thermal jacket around his shoulders and checked the readings on his scanner. The device beeped softly, showing him the locations of various life forms in the area. Most were small creatures, the rodent-like animals that lived in burrows beneath the frozen ground. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Daniel was which meant he studied alien life forms. The United Earth Colonial Authority had sent him to 7B to catalog the native species and determine which ones might be useful or dangerous to human settlers. It was lonely work. The nearest human colony was 200 kilometers away, and Outpost Theta, where Daniel lived and worked, had only 12 permanent staff members. He liked it that way. Daniel had never been good with crowds. He preferred the company of animals, even alien ones, to most humans. Animals were honest. They did not lie or pretend or play political games. They simply were what they were. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that would have been impossible on Earth. Daniel began walking back toward the outpost, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. He had been out for 6 hours, and his fingers were numb despite his heated gloves. That was when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a rock formation. The thing was large, nearly 2 meters long, and it lay motionless against a boulder about 50 meters from the outpost perimeter. But rocks did not have that particular shade of deep blue, like a bruise or a midnight ocean. Daniel stopped walking. His heart began to beat faster as he raised his scanner and pointed it at the shape. The device chirped an alarm. Unknown large predator, extreme caution advised. He knew what it was even before he looked at the species identification. There was only one creature on 7B that matched that size and color profile. Daniel's mouth went dry. Every instinct told him to run back to the outpost, to seal the doors and call for an extermination team. They were the most feared predators in the known galaxy. They had attacked human colonies, killed hundreds of settlers, and resisted every attempt at control or elimination. The galactic community had declared them vermin, pests to be destroyed wherever they were found. But the creature was not moving. Daniel stood there in the howling wind watching. 1 minute passed, then 2, that did not stir. It might be dead, he thought, or dying. He should still run. A dying was still dangerous, but something kept his feet planted on the frozen ground. Call it scientific curiosity, call it something else. He could not look away. Slowly, carefully, Daniel began to approach. The closer he got, the more details he could see. The looked like something from an Earth nightmare if that nightmare had been designed by an artist with a fondness for deadly beauty. It had 6 legs, each ending in curved claws that could tear through steel. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered between blue and purple depending on the light. 2 rows of teeth lined its long snout, each tooth as long as Daniel's finger. But it was the eyes that caught his attention. They were golden, like twin suns, and they were open. The creature was still alive. It was watching him approach. Daniel stopped about 10 meters away. His hand moved toward the pistol on his hip, though he knew the small weapon would do little against a healthy. These creatures could survive being shot dozens of times. They healed faster than any species on record. But this one was not healthy. Now that he was closer, he could see the wounds. Deep gashes ran along its flank, still seeping dark blood. One of its front legs was bent at an unnatural angle. It had been in a fight, and it had lost. They made a sound. It was soft, almost gentle, nothing like the terrifying screams that Daniel had heard in the warning videos during his training. It sounded almost like a question. Then he saw the cubs. There were 3 of them huddled against their mother's belly. They were small, perhaps the size of house cats, their scales a lighter shade of blue than their mother's. Their eyes were closed and they were shivering. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. He was a scientist. He knew he should be objective, clinical, detached. But looking at those tiny creatures, trembling in the cold beside their dying mother, he felt something that had nothing to do with science. He felt pity. The mother moved. It was clearly causing her tremendous pain, but she pushed herself up on her remaining good legs and nudged her cubs toward Daniel. The movement was slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. She was giving them to him. Daniel stood frozen in disbelief. This could not be happening. Were mindless killers, according to everything he had been taught. They did not make conscious decisions. They did not show emotion. They certainly did not trust their young to other species. But the mother's golden eyes met his, and he saw something there that shattered every assumption he had ever held about her kind. He saw hope, desperate, dying hope. She pushed the cubs again, harder this time, and then collapsed back against the boulder. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. She did not have long. Daniel made a decision. Later, he would not be able to explain why. Perhaps it was the look in her eyes. Perhaps it was the sight of those tiny cubs, orphans in the making, shivering on an alien world. Perhaps it was simply that Daniel Cole had always been the kind of person who could not walk away from a creature in need. He stepped forward and knelt beside the cubs. They were warm, warmer than he expected given the temperature. Their scales were soft, not yet hardened into the armor they would develop as adults. One of them opened its eyes and looked at him. The eye was golden, like its mother's, but there was no threat in it, only confusion and fear. Daniel reached out his hand. The mother watched, her chest heaving with labored breaths. She made no move to attack him, even when his fingers touched her cub's head. The little creature flinched at first, then leaned into his touch. It made a small sound, somewhere between a purr and a whimper. Daniel scooped up all 3 cubs in his arms. They were heavier than they looked, solid and warm against his chest. 2 of them immediately pressed their faces against his jacket, seeking warmth. The third continued to watch him with those golden eyes. He looked at the mother. Her eyes were starting to glaze over, the light fading from them. But she was still watching, still conscious enough to see her cubs in the arms of a human. "I will take care of them," Daniel said. He did not know if she could understand him. He did not know if could comprehend human speech. But he said it anyway. The mother's eyes closed. A long, slow breath escaped her body, and then she was still. Daniel stood there for a long moment, holding 3 alien predator cubs against his chest, standing beside the body of their mother. The wind howled around him, indifferent to the small drama that had just unfolded. Then he turned and walked back to the outpost. The doors hissed open as he approached, responding to the chip implanted in his wrist. He stepped inside into the warmth and light of the station and immediately heard a scream. "What the hell is that?" Lisa Martin, the station's medical officer, was standing in the corridor. She was a small woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Right now, those eyes were fixed on the bundle in Daniel's arms with an expression of pure horror. "They are cubs," Daniel said. "Cubs, their mother died outside." "Are you insane?" Lisa backed away, her hand reaching for the emergency alarm on the wall. "Those things will kill us all. We need to call for extermination right now." "They are Bobby's, Lisa. Look at them." But Lisa was not looking at them. She was looking at Daniel as if he had lost his mind, which, to be fair, he might have. "Daniel, do you know what adults do? They tear through colony walls. They eat people. They are the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, and you just brought 3 of them into our home." "They are cubs," Daniel repeated. "They have not eaten anyone. They cannot even open their eyes properly yet. If we put them back outside, they will die." "Good, that is what should happen. That is what the protocols say should happen." Daniel felt a spark of anger, which surprised him. He was not an angry person by nature. But something about the way Lisa was talking about these small, helpless creatures made his blood heat. "I am not putting them outside to die." Lisa stared at him. "Daniel." "No," he held the cubs. These are rare specimens of an understudied species. I am invoking Research Protocol 17, which allows me to maintain live specimens for study purposes." Lisa's mouth opened and closed several times. "You cannot be serious. Protocol 17 is for insects and small mammals, not apex predators. The protocol does not specify size or danger level. It says live specimens. These are live specimens. I am keeping them. Before Lisa could respond, another voice cut in. What is going on here? Captain Hill had emerged from his office at the end of the corridor. He was a large man with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had been a military officer before taking command of Outpost Theta, and he still carried himself like one. His eyes moved from Lisa to Daniel to the bundle in Daniel's arms. His expression did not change, but Daniel saw his hand move toward the sidearm on his hip. Cole, what are those? Cubs, sir, orphans. I found them outside with their dying mother. And you brought them inside? Yes, sir. Captain Hill was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the soft whimpering of the cubs and the ever-present hum of the station's life support systems. You know what are capable of? The captain said finally. Yes, sir, but these are not adult. They are infants. They have no ability to harm anyone right now, and by the time they grow, I believe I can. You believe you can what? Train them? Domesticate them? The captain's voice was flat, but Daniel could hear the disbelief underneath. No one has ever successfully done that. No one has ever tried. The galactic consensus is that cannot be tamed. The galactic consensus is based on studying adults that have already learned to see other species as enemies, Daniel said. These cubs have not learned anything yet. Their mother gave them to me. She looked at me and made a choice to trust me with her children. Does that sound like a mindless beast to you? Captain Hill did not answer. Lisa spoke up. Sir, with respect, this is madness. We need to dispose of these creatures before they grow large enough to be a threat. I am invoking Protocol 17, Daniel said quickly. These are research specimens under my authority as chief. The captain raised an eyebrow. Protocol 17. Yes, sir. 4. The protocol does not exclude any species. Hill looked at him for a long moment. Daniel could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The captain was not a cruel man, but he was practical. His first duty was to the safety of the station and its crew. 3 months, the captain said finally. Lisa made a sound of protest, but Hill held up his hand to silence her. 3 months, Cole. You keep them contained. You study them. You document everything. If at the end of 3 months they show any sign of aggression, any threat to this station, I will personally put them down. Is that understood? Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me. This is against my better judgment, and I expect you to prove that my better judgment was wrong. Dismissed. Daniel hurried toward his quarters before anyone could change their mind. Lisa followed him, her footsteps sharp and angry on the metal floor. This is a mistake, Daniel. You are going to get people killed. Maybe, or maybe I am going to learn something that changes everything we think we know about. And if you are wrong... Daniel stopped at the door to his quarters and looked back at her. Then I will be the first one they kill. Will that make you feel better? Lisa did not answer. She just shook her head and walked away. Daniel entered his quarters and closed the door behind him. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a desk, and a small attached bathroom. He had made it his own over the past 3 years, filling the shelves with samples and books and little mementos from Earth. He set the cubs down on his bed. They immediately huddled together, pressing against each other for warmth and comfort. Their eyes were open now, all 6 of them, watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. It is okay, Daniel said softly. You are safe now. I am not going to hurt you. He did not know if they could understand him, probably not, but he talked to them anyway, keeping his voice low and gentle. He had read studies that suggested many species responded more to tone than to actual words. A calm voice meant safety. A harsh voice meant danger. The cubs watched him, their little bodies slowly relaxing as he spoke. After a few minutes, one of them, the smallest one, uncurled from the group and crept toward him across the blanket. Daniel held very still. The cub approached his hand, sniffed it, and then pressed its head against his palm. He felt his heart squeeze in his chest. Hello, little one, he whispered. Are you hungry? You must be hungry. Let me see what I can find for you. He went to his small refrigeration unit and pulled out a container of protein paste, the standard nutrition supplement for the station. It was bland and gray and definitely not designed for cubs, but it was full of the amino acids and nutrients that most carbon-based life forms needed. He squeezed a small amount onto his finger and offered it to the bold little cub. The creature sniffed it, wrinkled its nose in a very human-like expression of doubt, and then licked the paste off his finger. It chewed thoughtfully, then looked up at him with an expression that clearly said, "More, please." Daniel smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had felt in weeks. He fed all three cubs, taking turns offering them small amounts of paste until their bellies were round and full. Then, one by one, they curled up on his bed and fell asleep. Daniel sat in his desk chair and watched them sleep. They were beautiful in their alien way. Deadly, yes. Dangerous, certainly, but also small and helpless and orphaned on a cold world far from anywhere they belonged. He thought about their mother, lying dead in the frozen waste outside. What had driven her to this planet? What had wounded her so badly? And why, in her final moments, had she chosen to trust a human with her most precious possession? He did not have answers. He might never have answers. But he had three small cubs sleeping on his bed and a promise to keep. He named them that night as they slept. The largest one, the one who had watched him most carefully, he called Shadow. The smallest, the brave one who had approached him first, he called Ember. And the middle one, the quietest, who seemed to fade into the background and observe everything, he called Ghost. Shadow, Ember, and Ghost. Three orphans from the stars, in the care of a lonely on a world at the edge of human space. It was the beginning of something. Daniel did not know what yet. But as he watched them sleep, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath, he felt something stir in his chest. It was hope, he realized. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was not as simple as everyone believed. Maybe monsters could be something else, if given the chance. The first week was difficult. The cubs were disoriented and frightened, which made them unpredictable. They cried for their mother in the night, high-pitched keening sounds that broke Daniel's heart. They refused to eat unless he hand-fed them. They snapped at anyone who came near, even Daniel himself, their tiny teeth drawing blood more than once. Lisa refused to help, citing safety concerns and common sense. The other station staff avoided Daniel's quarters entirely. Captain Hill came by once to observe and left without saying a word. But Daniel was patient. He had spent his whole career working with frightened animals, and he knew that trust was not given freely. It had to be earned slowly through consistent kindness and absolute reliability. He established a routine. Every morning he fed the cubs at exactly the same time. Every afternoon he spent 2 hours simply sitting with them, not trying to touch or interact, just being present. Every evening he talked to them, telling them about his day, about Earth, about anything and everything. By the end of the first week, they had stopped snapping at him. By the end of the second week, they allowed him to touch them without flinching. By the end of the third week, they were following him around his quarters like puppies. It was remarkable, and Daniel documented everything. He recorded their behavior patterns, their vocalizations, their responses to different stimuli. He noted how they interacted with each other, how they established a hierarchy with Shadow as the clear leader, how they communicated through a complex combination of sounds and body language. He also noted something that surprised him. They played. Cubs played. They chased each other around the room, pouncing and tumbling and wrestling in a way that was so similar to Earth puppies or kittens that Daniel could not help but laugh. They played with toys he made for them from old equipment parts. They played with shadows on the wall, leaping at them with comical intensity. Most surprisingly, they played with him. Ember was the first to initiate. One evening, as Daniel sat at his desk working on his notes, the small cub crept up behind him and pounced on his foot. Daniel yelped in surprise, and Ember scampered away, looking back over her shoulder with what could only be described as a mischievous expression. Daniel realized she was waiting for him to chase her. So he did. He got down on his hands and knees and crawled after her, and she squealed with delight and ran away, only to turn around and charge back at him. Shadow and Ghost watched from the bed, their golden eyes tracking the strange game with interest. It took 3 more days before they joined in, but eventually all 3 cubs were playing with Daniel regularly. They learned to moderate their strength, to keep their claws retracted, to bite gently instead of hard. When they forgot and hurt him, he would make a loud sound of pain and withdraw from the game. They learned quickly that hurting him meant the fun stopped. They were learning, that was the incredible thing. They were learning to be gentle, to read his cues, to adjust their behavior based on his responses. This was not mindless predator instinct. This was intelligence. This was the foundation of communication. Daniel began to believe that everything the galaxy thought it knew about was wrong. 1 month into his experiment, Lisa finally came to see him. She stood in the doorway of his quarters, watching the 3 cubs play on the floor. They were larger now, about the size of medium dogs, their scales beginning to harden into their adult coloring. But they were still obviously juvenile, their movements still clumsy and playful. "They have not killed you yet," she said. "No, they have not." "That is surprising." Daniel smiled. "Would you like to come in?" Lisa hesitated. The cubs had noticed her arrival and were watching her with curious golden eyes. She was an unknown quantity, and they were naturally cautious. "I am not sure that is a good idea." "They will not hurt you, not if you move slowly and speak calmly. They respond to tone more than words." Lisa considered this. Then slowly she stepped into the room. Ember immediately crept forward to investigate. Lisa froze, her hand moving toward the doorframe, ready to flee. "Hold still," Daniel said. "Let her come to you, she is just curious." Ember circled Lisa, sniffing at her boots, her legs, her dangling hand. Then she looked up at the woman's face and made a small sound, halfway between a chirp and a purr. Lisa's expression changed. It was subtle, just a softening around the eyes, but Daniel saw it. "She is not what I expected," Lisa admitted. "None of them are. Everything we thought we knew about is based on encounters with adults who had already been traumatized by violence. No one ever studied the young ones. No one ever tried to raise them with kindness." "And you think kindness can override millions of years of predator evolution?" "I think kindness can override anything, given enough time and consistency." Lisa looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised him. She crouched down and extended her hand toward Ember. The little cub sniffed her fingers, then pushed her head against Lisa's palm. "She likes you," Daniel said. Lisa's voice was soft. "I have never touched an alien predator before, not like this, not without sedation or restraints. She is not a predator right now. She is just a baby who wants attention." Lisa stroked Ember's head, and the cub closed her eyes in contentment. Shadow and Ghost watched from across the room, but they did not seem alarmed. If anything, they seemed curious about this new human who had entered their space. "I owe you an apology," Lisa said finally. "I wanted you to kill them that first night. I thought you were insane for keeping them." "You were being practical. I do not blame you for that." "But you were right. They are not monsters. They are just children. Children of a species that has been hunted and feared for centuries. I wonder sometimes how different they might have been if their ancestors had been treated with compassion instead of hostility." Lisa stood up, her hand still resting on Ember's head. "You are suggesting that violence is a response to how they have been treated, not an inherent trait." "I am suggesting it is worth investigating. Look at them, Lisa. These cubs have been raised with kindness, and they respond with kindness in return. What if that was possible on a larger scale?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "I would like to help you with your research, I mean, if you will have me." Daniel smiled. "I would like that very much." From that day on, Lisa became a regular visitor to Daniel's quarters. She helped him document the cubs' development, their behaviors, their responses to various stimuli. She brought medical equipment to monitor their health, their growth rates, their neurological activity. What they found was remarkable. Cubs were intelligent, not just animal intelligent, but genuinely, measurably smart. Their problem-solving abilities exceeded those of Earth's great apes. Their capacity for emotional bonding rivaled that of dogs or dolphins. Their communication skills, while different from human language, were complex and nuanced. They also discovered that the cubs had an incredible capacity for loyalty. Shadow, the largest, had appointed himself as Daniel's protector. Whenever a stranger approached, whenever an unfamiliar sound echoed through the station, Shadow would position himself between Daniel and the potential threat. He never attacked. Daniel had been very careful to teach him that aggression was not acceptable, but he was always alert, always ready. Ember had formed a similar bond with Lisa. The small cub followed the doctor everywhere she was permitted to go, sitting at her feet while she worked, curling up beside her when she rested. Lisa, who had never been particularly affectionate, found herself talking to Ember like a friend, sharing her thoughts and worries with the attentive cub. Ghost was different. The middle cub was quiet and observant, preferring to watch rather than participate. But Daniel noticed that Ghost paid particular attention to the station's maintenance technicians. The cub would sit for hours watching them repair equipment or adjust systems, his golden eyes tracking every movement with apparent fascination. "I think Ghost wants to learn," Daniel told Lisa one evening, as they watched the cub observe a technician named Robert fix a faulty power coupling. "Learn what? How to sabotage our life support." Daniel laughed. "How to understand how things work. He is curious about everything. I have seen him studying the light fixtures, the door mechanisms, even the food synthesizer." "That is unsettling." "Is it, or is it a sign of an intelligence we never expected?" Lisa considered this. "If are as intelligent as you suggest, why have we never seen evidence of it before?" "Because we have never given them the chance. Every encounter between humans and has been violent. We shoot first and ask questions never. We have been treating them like animals when they might be something much more." "You are talking about sentience. You are suggesting might be a sentient species." "I am suggesting it is possible. I am suggesting we should find out before we continue trying to exterminate them." The 3-month deadline approached, and Captain Hill called Daniel to his office for an assessment. Daniel brought his documentation, months of notes, recordings, and observations. He presented his findings calmly and thoroughly, showing the captain evidence of the cub's intelligence, their emotional capacity, their ability to learn and adapt. Captain Hill listened without interruption. When Daniel finished, the captain was quiet for a long moment. "You have done impressive work, Cole. I will admit that." "Thank you, sir." "But impressive work does not change the fact that those creatures will grow into apex predators. They may be sweet and docile now, but what happens when they reach full size? When their hunting instincts kick in?" "I do not believe those instincts are inevitable, sir. I believe they are learned behaviors, responses to environmental pressures. These cubs have been raised in a safe environment. They have never had to hunt to survive. They associate humans with food and comfort, not prey." "That is a theory." "Yes, sir, one I would like to continue testing." Captain Hill leaned back in his chair. "The Colonial Authority has been asking questions. Word has gotten out that we are harboring on this station. There are people who want them destroyed." Daniel felt his heart clench. "Sir, please, give me more time. Give them more time. They have done nothing wrong." "I know they have not. That is the only reason they are still alive," the captain sighed. "I am extending your Protocol 17 authorization for another 6 months, but understand, Cole, this is a temporary reprieve. At some point, decisions will be made above my head, decisions I may not be able to influence." "I understand, sir. Thank you." Daniel left the captain's office feeling relieved but unsettled. 6 more months. It was more time than he had hoped for, but it was not permanent. Eventually, forces beyond his control would decide the cub's fate. He had to find a way to prove, beyond any doubt, that could coexist with humans. He had to find evidence so compelling that even the most hostile authorities could not ignore it. He just did not know how yet. The cubs continued to grow. By the 5th month, they were the size of large dogs, their scales fully hardened, their teeth and claws developed into the weapons they would carry for life. They were beautiful and terrifying, exactly the kind of creatures that had haunted human nightmares since the first colony ship encountered a hunting pack. But their behavior remained gentle. They still played, they still sought affection, they still responded to Daniel and Lisa with trust and obedience. Shadow still protected, Ember still cuddled, Ghost still observed and learned. Daniel began taking them outside the station, on supervised walks across the frozen landscape. At first, he kept them on leashes, but he soon discovered they did not need them. The cubs stayed close, never straying more than a few meters from his side. They explored with curiosity but returned at his call every time. They learned to hunt the local rodent, and Daniel let them. It was natural behavior, and he saw no reason to suppress it, but he was careful to teach them the difference between acceptable prey and unacceptable targets. Rodents were fine, humans were not, equipment was not. Anything he pointed at and said no was off limits. They learned, they always learned. Other station staff began to cautiously approach. Robert the technician, who had been Ghost's favorite observation subject, worked up the courage to offer the cub a treat. Ghost accepted it gravely and allowed Robert to scratch behind his ears. Soon, Ghost was following Robert around the station, watching him work, occasionally handing him tools with his mouth when the technician asked for them. "I swear he understands me," Robert told Daniel one day. "I asked for a wrench and he brought me the right one, not just a tool, the right tool." "He might understand more than we think," Daniel said. The station was changing. Fear was being replaced by curiosity, hostility by acceptance. The cubs were becoming part of the community, strange and wonderful additions to the isolated outpost on the edge of known space. But Daniel knew it could not last. The outside world was watching, and the outside world was not as understanding as Outpost Theta had become. He was right. The message came 6 months and 2 weeks after Daniel had found the dying mother and her cubs. A corporate mining ship was en route to 7B. They had filed a claim on the planet's mineral resources and were coming to begin extraction operations. They were also aware of the presence at Outpost Theta. Captain Hill called Daniel to his office to deliver the news in person. "They want the creatures destroyed," the captain said, his voice heavy. "Corporate security chief is a man named Perry. He has a reputation for being efficient. They cannot do that. Protocol 17 means nothing to them. Corporate authority supersedes colonial research protocols when resource extraction is involved. It is in the fine print of every charter." The captain paused. "I have tried to buy time, Cole. I have sent messages, filed appeals, but they will be here in 3 days and they are not coming to negotiate." Daniel felt cold. Not the cold of 7B's endless wind, but a deeper cold, a freezing of hope. "What can I do?" "I do not know. I wish I had a better answer, but I do not. You have 3 days to find a solution, or those creatures you have worked so hard to protect will be put down like vermin." Daniel returned to his quarters in a daze. The cubs sensed his distress immediately. Shadow pressed against his legs. Ember climbed into his lap. Ghost watched him with those intelligent, observant eyes. He wrapped his arms around them and tried not to cry. 3 days, he had 3 days to save them. He did not know how, he did not know if it was even possible, but he was not going to give up. He had made a promise to a dying mother in the frozen waste, and he intended to keep it. No matter what it took. The next 3 days were a blur of desperate activity. Daniel contacted everyone he could think of who might help: xenobiology colleagues, animal rights organizations, sympathetic politicians. Most did not respond. The few who did offered sympathy but no solutions. Lisa worked beside him, searching for legal loopholes, precedents, anything that might protect the cubs from the coming storm. She found nothing. Even Captain Hill, who had grown unexpectedly fond of the creatures, could offer no help. His hands were tied by regulations and corporate power structures. The mining ship arrived on schedule, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a burst of distorted space. It was 10 times the size of Outpost Theta, a massive industrial vessel bristling with equipment and weapons. Perry led the security team that landed at the outpost. He was a hard-faced man with cold eyes and a reputation for getting results, whatever the cost. He shook Captain Hill's hand without warmth and demanded to see the immediately. Daniel refused. He barricaded himself in his quarters with the cubs and declared that he would not open the door until he had spoken to higher authorities. Perry laughed at that. Higher authorities had already given him permission. He had all the authorization he needed. Daniel had 24 hours to surrender the creatures, or Perry would come in and take them. That night, with the deadline looming, something unexpected happened. The pack arrived. They came out of the darkness of the frozen waste, a dozen adult predators, their scales gleaming in the light of 7B's moons. They were magnificent and terrifying, the stuff of nightmares made flesh. And they were headed straight for the outpost. Alarms blared, security teams mobilized. Perry ordered his men to prepare for combat, confident in their superior firepower. But Daniel noticed something the others did not. The pack was not attacking. They were approaching slowly, cautiously, keeping a careful distance from the outpost walls. They were not hunting. They were watching. And at the front of the pack, larger than the others, was a female with scars running down her flank. Her golden eyes were fixed on the outpost with an expression that Daniel had learned to recognize over the past months. It was the same expression the dying mother had worn when she pushed her cubs toward him. It was hope. Daniel made a decision. It was insane, suicidal, probably the thing he had ever done. But he made it anyway. He opened his door, walked past the security guards, past the shouting Perry, past the terrified station staff. He walked to the outpost's main entrance and stepped outside into the frozen wind. Shadow, Ember, and Ghost followed him. The pack went very still. A dozen pairs of golden eyes fixed on Daniel and the 3 cubs at his side. The female stepped forward. She was enormous, twice the size of the dying mother, her presence radiating power and danger. One swipe of her claws could tear Daniel in half. She stopped about 10 meters away and tilted her head, studying him. Daniel stood his ground. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking, but he did not run. "I am not your enemy," he said, knowing she probably could not understand him, but needing to say it anyway. "I took care of her children, your kin's children. I kept them safe. I loved them." The female made a sound. It was low and complex, a series of tones that seemed to convey meaning beyond what Daniel could comprehend. Shadow responded with a similar sound, then Ember, then Ghost. They were talking to her, they were explaining. The conversation went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Daniel stood in the freezing wind, surrounded by apex predators, waiting to find out if he would live or die. Finally, the female stepped forward again. She walked directly up to Daniel, so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body. She looked at him with those ancient golden eyes. Then she did something no had ever done to a human before. She bowed her head. Daniel heard gasps from behind him. He did not turn to look. He kept his eyes on the magnificent creature before him, on the gesture of respect she was offering. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and placed his hand on her head. Her scales were warm and smooth, not unlike the cubs when they had been young. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." The female raised her head. She looked past Daniel toward the outpost, toward the corporate soldiers with their weapons drawn. She made another sound, this one clearly directed at the pack behind her. They settled onto the frozen ground, arranging themselves in a circle around the outpost. They were not attacking. They were waiting, watching. Daniel understood. They were giving him a chance. They were giving humanity a chance. If he could prove that coexistence was possible, they would accept it. If not, well, that was a problem for later. He turned and walked back toward the outpost, the cubs at his side. Perry was waiting at the entrance, his face twisted with rage. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Cole? You just walked out there and let those monsters into our perimeter." "They are not monsters," Daniel said. "And they are not attacking, they are waiting." "Waiting for what?" For us to make a choice, violence or peace, extermination or coexistence. Daniel looked the security chief in the eye. What do you choose, Mr. Perry? Perry's hand moved toward his sidearm. I choose to do my job. Those creatures are a threat. They die. If you attack them, they will kill everyone in this outpost. You may get some of them, but not all. And the ones who survive will remember. They will remember that humans chose violence once again, and the next colony they encounter will pay the price. Perry hesitated. Captain Hill stepped forward. He is right, Perry. Look at them. They had every opportunity to attack, and they did not. Cole's cubs went out there and somehow convinced them to stand down. Do you really want to throw away that possibility for the sake of following orders? I have my instructions. Your instructions were based on incomplete information. The situation has changed. I am invoking contact protocol, which gives me authority to suspend all other directives pending diplomatic review. Perry's face went red. You cannot do that. I just did. Stand down your men, Mr. Perry. That is an order. For a long moment, Daniel thought Perry would refuse. The man's hand hovered over his weapon, his jaw clenched with fury. But finally, slowly, he took his hand away. This is not over, he said. When corporate hears about this, they will learn that we have made first peaceful contact with a species that the entire galaxy thought was irredeemably hostile. Do you want to be the man who prevented that? The man who started a war we might lose? Perry said nothing. He turned and walked away, his men following. Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Captain Hill put a hand on his shoulder. Well done, Cole. I do not know how you did that, but well done. I did not do anything. They made the choice. Because you gave them the opportunity. Because you raised those cubs with kindness and proved that humans could be trusted. The captain looked out at the pack of still arranged in their circle around the outpost. What happens now? Daniel smiled. Now we start the hard part, learning to talk to each other. The days that followed were a whirlwind of unprecedented activity. Word spread quickly through the galactic communication network. Humans had made peaceful contact with the most feared predators in known space were willing to negotiate. Scientists, diplomats, and media representatives began arriving at 7B. The small outpost that Daniel had called home for 3 years became the center of galactic attention. Daniel found himself appointed as humanity's first ambassador to the. It was a title he had never sought and did not particularly want, but there was no one else qualified. He was the only human who had earned the creature's trust. With Shadow, Ember, and Ghost serving as intermediaries, Daniel began the slow process of establishing communication with the pack. It was difficult work. Language was based on combinations of sounds, postures, and sense signals that humans could not fully replicate or perceive. But over time, through patience and persistence, a basic vocabulary began to emerge. The female, who Daniel learned was called something that translated roughly as became his primary contact. She was the pack's leader, their voice, and their authority. What she accepted, they accepted. From Daniel learned the truth about the. They were not mindless killers. They had never been mindless killers. They had culture, traditions, a complex social structure. They communicated, made decisions, formed bonds just like humans did. But they had been hunted for centuries. Every species they encountered had tried to exterminate them. They learned to strike first, to kill before they could be killed. Their violence was not instinct, it was survival. The dying mother who had given Daniel her cubs had been a scout, searching for safe territory where her pack might settle. She had been wounded by another predator species, not by humans. In her final moments, she had seen a human watching her and made a desperate gamble, that this stranger might be different from all the others. She had been right. The cubs had been raised with kindness, and they had carried that kindness back to their own species. They had shown and the pack that not all aliens were enemies. That trust was possible. That peace was possible. It was a beginning, just a beginning. There would be setbacks and challenges and moments when everything seemed ready to fall apart. But it was a beginning. 6 months after the confrontation at Outpost Theta, Daniel stood on a cliff overlooking the frozen plains of 7B. Shadow sat on his right, massive now, an adult in his full power and beauty. Ember sat on his left, smaller but no less magnificent. Ghost was somewhere behind them, probably observing a maintenance technician at work. Approached from the direction of the Pax camp. She had grown to accept Daniel as something like a friend, as much as the concept could translate between their species. She settled beside him and looked out at the view. Through their developing shared language, she asked him a question. Daniel understood it as, "Why did you save them? Why did you choose trust over fear?" He considered the question for a long moment. The wind howled around them, indifferent and eternal. The sun was setting, painting the sky in alien colors. "Because someone had to be first," he said finally. "Someone had to choose differently, if not us who, if not now when." Was quiet, processing his words. Then she made a gesture he had come to recognize as agreement. She looked at him with those ancient golden eyes, so like the dying mother who had started everything. Then she did what she had done that first night, when everything had changed. She bowed her head in respect. Across the galaxy, other species watched the footage from 7B. Humans, those strange, soft, short-lived creatures, had done the impossible. They had found peace with built a bridge where everyone said no bridge could exist. The galactic councils began to whisper a new word when they spoke of humanity. Not prey, not threat. Something far more unsettling to species who had built their civilizations on the certainties of predator and prey. They called humans bridge builders. And they began to wonder what else these impossible creatures might accomplish. Daniel did not care about galactic politics or humanity's reputation among the stars. He cared about the 3 cubs he had raised from orphans, now grown into something between family and friends. He cared about the understanding he had built with and her pack. He cared about the proof that kindness could overcome fear, that trust could overcome hostility, that the galaxy was not as simple as everyone had believed. He watched the sun set on 7B, surrounded by creatures that should have been his enemies but had become his family. And he smiled, because this was just the beginning. There were other species out there, other walls to break down, other bridges to build. Humanity had taken the first step on a journey that might reshape the galaxy. Daniel Cole, lonely from a small outpost on a frozen world, had changed everything. All because he had chosen kindness over fear. All because he had kept his promise to a dying mother and her 3 small cubs. The wind howled, the sun set, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, species who had never known peace began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was possible. The bridge builders had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.